Before I announced my pregnancy to everyone, I first told my mother, and she immediately pleaded, "Please, could you get rid of the baby? Your sister just got pregnant and I want her to bring the first child into the house. We even have a huge surprise planned for her." I pleaded back, "What about mine?" She coldly replied, "We can't afford another one, which is why you'll help us fund your sister's luxury gift." When I tried to argue that I would still announce it, she threatened me, "If you do, I'll tell everyone the baby isn't your husband's. Let's see what you'll do then. Let your sister have her time, you can always have kids later on." I didn't say anything, I just quietly left. But what I did next left them speechless. I'm Julia, 28 years old, and I've been married to my husband David for 3 years. We've been trying to have a baby for almost 2 years, going through fertility treatments, countless doctor visits, and more heartbreak than I care to remember. When we finally got that positive pregnancy test 2 months ago, I cried tears of joy for the first time in years. My younger sister Madison, 24, has always been the golden child in our family. She's the one who got the college fund I never had, the one whose achievements were celebrated while mine were barely acknowledged, and the one who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. She married her college boyfriend Tyler last year in a wedding that cost more than David and I make in a year combined, all funded by our parents, of course. Given our family dynamics, I should have expected what happened next, but nothing could have prepared me for the conversation I had with my mother, Linda, when I decided to share our happy news. I drove to my parents' house on a sunny Saturday morning, practically bouncing with excitement. David and I had agreed that we'd tell my family first, then his. I had even stopped by the store to buy a cute World's Best Grandma mug as a surprise way to break the news. My mother was in the kitchen when I arrived, and my father Robert was out playing golf as usual. Perfect timing, I thought. I could tell Mom first, and then we could surprise Dad together when he got home. "Mom, I have some incredible news," I said, unable to contain my smile as I pulled out the gift bag. She looked up from her coffee, seeming distracted. "Oh, honey, actually I need to talk to you about something first. Sit down." Something in her tone made my stomach drop, but I pushed the feeling aside and sat down at the kitchen table where I'd eaten countless childhood meals. "What is it, Mom?" She took a deep breath and looked me straight in the eyes. "Madison is pregnant." For a moment, I felt pure joy. My sister was going to be a mother too. We could go through this journey together, our kids could grow up as cousins and best friends. But then I saw the expression on my mother's face, and my excitement began to fade. "That's wonderful news," I said carefully. "Actually, that makes my news even more, Julia," she interrupted. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to really think about it before you answer." I waited, the gift bag still clutched in my hands. "Madison just told us yesterday, and your father and I have already started planning something very special for her. We're thinking of throwing her a huge announcement party, maybe even hiring a photographer, the works. She deserves to have her moment." "Okay," I said slowly, still not understanding where this was going. "The thing is," my mother continued, "we can only really focus on one pregnancy at a time. It would be too much for the family, too expensive, and honestly, it would take away from Madison's special time." My heart began to race. "Mom, what are you trying to say?" She reached across the table and grabbed my hands. "Julia, honey, please. Could you get rid of the baby? Madison just got pregnant and I want her to bring the first grandchild into the house. We even have a huge surprise planned for her." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually gasped and pulled my hands away from hers. "Get rid of the baby? Mom, are you serious right now? I know it sounds harsh, but think about it practically. You're older, you'll have other chances. Madison is young and this is her first. She should get to experience being the first to give us a grandchild." I stared at her in disbelief. "What about mine?" I pleaded. "Mom, David and I have been trying for 2 years. We've been through so much." Her expression hardened. "We can't afford another one, which is why you'll help us fund Madison's luxury gift instead. We're thinking of getting her a luxury baby carriage, maybe that $3,000 one she was looking at, plus nursery furniture, and of course there's the party." "You want me to fund Madison's baby gifts after asking me to terminate my pregnancy?" I could barely get the words out. "It's not terminating, Julia. It's just waiting for the right time. Madison needs this right now. She and Tyler are still getting established, and this baby means everything to them." I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "And my baby doesn't mean everything to David and me?" "Don't be dramatic," she said, her voice taking on that sharp edge I remembered from childhood whenever I dared to challenge her decisions. "You're being selfish." "I'm being selfish?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Mom, I'm pregnant. I'm having a baby. I'm not going to get rid of it so Madison can have some kind of exclusive first grandchild experience. When I tried to argue that I would still announce my pregnancy, that I wouldn't hide it or pretend it wasn't happening, my mother's face went cold in a way that genuinely scared me. If you do, she said quietly, I'll tell everyone the baby isn't David's. Let's see what you'll do then. Let Madison have her time. You can always have kids later on. The accusation was so shocking, so completely out of left field, that I couldn't even respond at first. The baby was absolutely David's, we'd been trying for so long, and I'd never been unfaithful to him, not even close. But I realized in that moment that my mother was willing to destroy my marriage and my reputation to protect Madison's special moment. I looked at this woman who had raised me, who I'd loved and respected despite all the ways she'd favored my sister over the years, and I realized I was looking at a stranger. I didn't say anything. I just quietly left, the gift bag still in my hands, the world's best grandma mug inside feeling like a cruel joke. I sat in my car in their driveway for 20 minutes, crying and shaking. Then I drove home and told David everything. My husband was furious in a way I'd never seen before. He wanted to drive straight back to my parents' house and confront my mother, but I stopped him. Instead, we talked for hours about what we should do. That's when I decided to do something that would leave them speechless. First, I called my father on his cell phone while he was still at the golf course. Dad, I need to tell you something important, and I need you to hear it from me first. What's wrong, sweetheart? Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. David and I are having a baby. The joy in his voice was everything I'd hoped to hear from my mother. Julia. That's incredible news. Oh my God, I'm going to be a grandfather. Dad, there's something else you should know. Madison is also pregnant. Both of my girls? This is the best day of my life. I could hear him telling his golf buddies in the background, and their congratulations and cheers made me smile for the first time since leaving my mother's house. Dad, I need to ask you something. Did Mom mention anything to you about prioritizing one pregnancy over the other? There was a pause. What do you mean? I told him everything, the request to terminate my pregnancy, the demand that I fund Madison's gifts, and finally, the threat to tell everyone the baby wasn't David's. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched on so long I thought the call had dropped. Dad? I'm here. His voice was different now, tight with anger. Julia, your mother and I are going to have a very serious conversation when I get home. But I wasn't done. While my father was having it out with my mother, I was implementing the rest of my plan. I called my grandmother, Patricia, my mother's own mother, who lived in the assisted living facility across town. Grandma Pat had always been my favorite person in the world, and she'd never played favorites between Madison and me. Grandma, I have some wonderful news to share with you. I told her about the pregnancy, and her reaction was everything my mother's should have been. She cried happy tears and immediately started making plans to knit baby blankets. Then I told her about the conversation with my mother. Grandma Pat was quiet for a long moment. Julia, honey, I need you to do something for me. Anything, Grandma. I need you to come pick me up, and then we're going to pay your parents a visit. Grandma Pat might have been 84 years old, but she was still a force of nature when she wanted to be. She'd raised 5 children as a single mother after my grandfather died young, and she'd never tolerated nonsense from anyone. When we arrived at my parents' house, my father's car was in the driveway. Apparently he'd left the golf course early. We could hear raised voices through the front door. Let me handle this, Grandma Pat said, walking into the house without knocking. The voices stopped immediately. Patricia? My mother called out, clearly surprised. Linda Marie, my grandmother said, using my mother's full name the way she did when she was serious, I need to speak with you. We found my parents in the living room. My father looked relieved to see us, while my mother looked like she'd been caught doing something she shouldn't have. Julia told me about your conversation today, Grandma Pat said without preamble. I want to hear your side of things. My mother glanced between my father and grandmother, clearly trying to figure out how to spin the situation. Mom, it's complicated. No, it's not. Grandma Pat sat down in the chair that had always been hers whenever she visited. You have 2 daughters who are both pregnant. That means you have 2 daughters to celebrate and support. It's actually quite simple. But Madison nothing? My grandmother's voice was sharp. Linda, I raised you better than this. What happened next was a masterclass in family dynamics. My grandmother systematically dismantled every one of my mother's arguments. She pointed out that having 2 pregnant daughters was a blessing, not a burden. She reminded my mother of all the times I'd been overlooked in favor of Madison. And then she delivered the killing blow. If you can't find it in your heart to celebrate both of your daughters equally, then perhaps you don't deserve to be called grandma by either of their children. My mother went pale. Mom, you can't be serious. Oh, I'm very serious. And here's what's going to happen. You're going to apologize to Julia. You're going to plan celebrations for both pregnancies. And if I ever hear that you've threatened to spread lies about Julia's marriage again, you and I are going to have a very different kind of conversation. But I still wasn't done with my revenge. While this family meeting was happening, David had been making some phone calls of his own. See, David works in marketing for a large company, and he knows people in event planning and social media. He'd also grown up with Madison and knew exactly which buttons to push. He'd called Madison directly and told her the great news that both she and I were pregnant, and how exciting it would be for the cousins to grow up together. He'd also mentioned, very casually, that our parents were planning some kind of big celebration for her pregnancy and that he hoped they'd do something nice for us too, since we'd been trying for so long. Madison, who despite everything was actually a decent person when she wasn't being enabled by our mother, was horrified when she realized what had happened. She called me while I was still at our parents' house. Julia, she said, and I could hear that she'd been crying. I had no idea Mom said those things to you. I would never want you to. I can't even say it. I'm so happy you're pregnant. Madison, no, let me finish. I told Mom weeks ago that I hoped you'd get pregnant soon too, so our kids could be close in age. I never asked for some big exclusive celebration. I just wanted to share the news with the family. It turned out that Madison had no idea about the expensive gifts or the elaborate party. My mother had made all of that up, probably figuring she could manipulate me into funding it and then present it as a surprise to Madison. I'm coming over, Madison said. Tyler's driving me now. When Madison and Tyler arrived, the whole truth came out. Madison confronted our mother directly, asking where she'd gotten the idea that she wanted some kind of first grandchild exclusive experience. My mother, cornered by her own mother, her husband, and both of her daughters, finally admitted that she'd gotten carried away with wanting to make Madison's pregnancy special, and that she'd misspoken about asking me to terminate my pregnancy. But I wasn't ready to accept half-hearted apologies and explanations. Mom, I said, you didn't misspeak. You looked me in the eye and asked me to get rid of my baby. You threatened to destroy my marriage with lies. You asked me to fund gifts for Madison after asking me to end my pregnancy. These weren't accidents or misunderstandings. Julia, you were just showing me exactly how little you think of me compared to Madison. Well, message received. That's when I delivered the final part of my revenge. I've made some decisions, I announced to the room. First, David and I will be having our own baby shower, and we'll be planning our own celebrations. We won't be contributing to any gifts for Madison beyond what we would normally give as her sister and brother-in-law. My mother started to protest, but I held up my hand. Second, Grandma Pat has agreed to move in with David and me for the last few months of my pregnancy and the first few months after the baby is born. That way, our child will have at least one grandparent who actually wanted them to exist. Grandma Pat nodded firmly. I've been thinking about leaving the assisted living place anyway. Too many rules there. Third, I continued, our baby will know all about this conversation when they're old enough to understand it. They'll know that their grandmother asked their mother to abort them so their cousin could be more special. My mother looked like she'd been slapped. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. And finally, until you can genuinely apologize, not explain, not justify, but apologize, for what you said and did today, David and I need some space from you. The room was completely silent. Madison broke the silence first. Mom, what Julia's asking for isn't unreasonable. What you said to her was horrible. My father nodded. Linda, I think you need to do some serious thinking about what's really important here. Tyler, who had been quiet up until this point, spoke up. Mrs. Johnson, Madison and I want both babies to be celebrated. We never asked for anything exclusive. But the real knockout punch came from Grandma Pat. Linda, I've been thinking about my will lately, she said conversationally. I was planning to leave the house to both girls equally, but now I'm wondering if Julia might need it more, especially if she's going to be raising her children without proper grandparental support. My mother's face went white. Grandma Pat's house was worth nearly $500,000, and my mother had been counting on that inheritance for years. Mom, please, I'll make my decision based on how this situation gets resolved, Grandma Pat said firmly. That was 3 weeks ago, but let me tell you about everything that happened in between, because the drama was far from over. The very next day after our family confrontation, my mother showed up at my workplace. I work as a nurse at St. Mary's Hospital, and she actually came to the maternity ward where I work, thinking she could corner me during my shift. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, my own mother harassing me in the place where I help bring babies into the world every day. My supervisor, Janet, who's known me for 5 years, immediately sensed something was wrong when she saw me talking to my mother in the hallway. I was visibly upset, and my mother was getting increasingly agitated as I refused to engage with her manipulation tactics. "Julia, is everything okay?" Janet asked, approaching us with concern. "Everything's fine," my mother said quickly, but I could see the panic in her eyes. "Actually, it's not," I said. "Mom, you need to leave. This is my workplace and you're disrupting my ability to do my job. I just need 5 minutes to explain." "No." I turned to Janet. "I'm sorry, but I need security to escort my mother out. She's here against my wishes and won't leave." The look of humiliation on my mother's face when hospital security walked her to the elevator was something I'll never forget. But what she did next was even worse. She called my supervisor later that day and tried to tell her that I was having emotional problems due to pregnancy hormones and that I might not be stable enough to work with patients. She actually tried to get me in trouble at my job because I wouldn't accept her non-apology. Janet called me into her office the next morning. "Julia, I've been a labor and delivery nurse for 20 years, and I've never had a family member call to question an employee's mental stability. Do you want to tell me what's really going on?" So I told her everything. Janet listened with increasingly wide eyes, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Julia, in all my years working with pregnant women and their families, I have never heard of a mother asking her daughter to terminate a wanted pregnancy so a sibling could have more attention. That's not pregnancy hormone issues, that's emotional abuse." She recommended I speak to Dr. Martinez, the staff psychologist who works with patients and employees dealing with trauma. "Not because there's anything wrong with you," she clarified, "but because what your mother did to you is genuinely traumatic, and you might benefit from professional support." I took her advice and met with Dr. Martinez that afternoon. Talking to her helped me understand that what I was feeling, the shock, the betrayal, the anger, was completely normal and justified. She also helped me see patterns in my relationship with my mother that I'd been ignoring for years. "Julia," Dr. Martinez said, "what you're describing sounds like a pattern of emotional manipulation and favoritism that's been going on for most of your life. The pregnancy situation was just the most extreme example." She was right. As we talked, I remembered countless instances where my achievements were minimized while Madison's were celebrated, where my needs were ignored while Madison's were prioritized, where I was expected to sacrifice for Madison's benefit. When I was 16 and got into the Honor Society, my mother forgot to come to the ceremony because she was shopping for Madison's homecoming dress. When I graduated nursing school, the family dinner was canceled because Madison had a date that night. When David and I got engaged, my mother spent the entire dinner talking about when Madison would get engaged and how much more elaborate her wedding would be. Dr. Martinez helped me see that I'd been trained my entire life to accept being second best in my own family, and that's why my mother's request had been so shocking. It wasn't just about the pregnancy, it was about a lifetime of being told I was less important than my sister. Meanwhile, the family drama was escalating in ways I never could have predicted. My Aunt Carol, my mother's younger sister, called me 2 days after the workplace incident. "Julia, honey, I need to tell you something that's been weighing on me for years." She went on to explain that my mother had been complaining about me to extended family members for years, always positioning herself as a long-suffering mother dealing with a difficult daughter, while praising Madison as the perfect child. "She told me last Christmas that you were jealous of Madison and that's why you weren't closer to the family," Carol said. "She made it sound like you were the problem, but after hearing what really happened with the pregnancy announcement, I realized she's been manipulating all of us." Carol wasn't the only one. Over the next few days, I received calls from my Uncle Mike, my cousin Jennifer, and even my mother's longtime friend Mrs. Chen, all telling me similar stories about how my mother had been portraying me to others. The most devastating revelation came from my cousin Jennifer, who told me about a conversation she'd overheard at Madison's wedding. "Your mother was talking to a group of ladies from her church," Jennifer said. "Someone asked where you were, you'd stepped outside to take a work call, and your mother said, 'Oh, Julia's always been difficult. She can't stand it when Madison gets attention, so she creates drama.' Julia, I should have said something then, but I didn't know how deep this went." I realized my mother had been systematically undermining my reputation with extended family and family friends for years, painting me as jealous and difficult while positioning herself as the victim of my supposed behavior. But the real bombshell came from an unexpected source: my father. 3 days after the workplace incident, my father called and asked if he could come over to talk privately. When he arrived, he looked exhausted and older than I'd ever seen him. "Julia, there are things you need to know about your mother's behavior, things I should have addressed years ago." He sat at our kitchen table, the same spot where I'd eaten breakfast every morning as a child when I visited their house, and told me things that completely reframed my understanding of our family dynamics. "Your mother has always struggled with fairness when it comes to you and Madison," he began. "Even when you were little, she seemed to see Madison as an extension of herself and you as— I don't know how to explain it. Like you were somehow separate from her in a way that made her uncomfortable." He told me that he'd argued with my mother countless times over the years about her treatment of me, but that she always had explanations that seemed reasonable on the surface. She'd say things like, "Julia is more independent, she doesn't need as much support," or "Madison is more sensitive, she needs extra encouragement," my father explained. "I believed her because I wanted to believe her, and because you always seemed to handle things so well." But then he revealed something that made my blood run cold. "Julia, your mother didn't just threaten to tell people the baby wasn't David's. She actually called your Aunt Carol and planted the seed of that rumor the day after you left the house." I felt like the room was spinning. "She what?" "She called Carol and said she was worried about your marriage, that you'd been acting strange lately, and that she hoped David was the father of your baby. She didn't outright accuse you of cheating, but she said enough to make Carol suspicious." I was speechless. My mother had actually started spreading rumors about my fidelity to try to pressure me into compliance with her demands. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because Carol called me yesterday to ask if there were problems in your marriage, and I realized what your mother had done. I confronted her about it, and she admitted it. She said she was just trying to protect the family from the complications of having 2 pregnancies at once." My father's face was full of shame and regret. "Julia, I failed you as a father. I should have put a stop to this favoritism years ago, but I kept telling myself it wasn't that bad, that you were strong enough to handle it. I was wrong, and I'm so sorry." This conversation with my father changed everything for me. It wasn't just about my mother's reaction to my pregnancy anymore, it was about a lifetime of manipulation, favoritism, and now outright sabotage of my reputation and marriage. That night, David and I had a long conversation about what we wanted to do with this new information. David was beyond furious when I told him about the rumor my mother had started. "She's trying to destroy our marriage to control your pregnancy announcement," he said, pacing around our living room. "Julia, this isn't just favoritism or emotional manipulation anymore. This is malicious." We decided it was time to take more decisive action. The next morning, I called every family member my mother had spoken to and told them the truth about what she'd said and done. I didn't just tell them about the pregnancy conversation, I told them about the workplace harassment, the rumors she'd started about my marriage, and the years of manipulation that had led to this point. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My extended family was horrified, not just by the pregnancy situation, but by the realization that my mother had been manipulating family relationships for years. My Uncle Mike was particularly angry. "Julia, your mother told me years ago that you didn't like family gatherings because you were jealous of Madison. I believed her, and I'm ashamed of that now. I should have reached out to you myself instead of just accepting her version of events." My cousin Jennifer decided to do some investigating of her own. She called several other family members and started piecing together a pattern of my mother's manipulation that went back decades. "Julia, she's been playing family members against each other for years," Jennifer told me. She told Aunt Patricia that Uncle Mike thought she was getting too old to live alone. She told Uncle Mike that Aunt Patricia was worried about his drinking. "She's been creating drama and division in this family for years, and we all just accepted her version of events." But the most shocking revelation came from my grandmother, Grandma Pat, who had been doing some thinking of her own since moving in with David and me. "Julia, honey, I need to tell you something about your mother that I probably should have addressed years ago," she said one evening as we were preparing dinner together. She sat down at our kitchen table, it was becoming the place where all the family truth-telling happened, and looked at me seriously. "Your mother was jealous of you from the day you were born." I stopped chopping vegetables and stared at her. "What do you mean?" "When you were born, you looked exactly like my mother, your great-grandmother Rose. Everyone commented on it. Rose was considered the beauty of her generation, and you had her eyes, her bone structure, even her expressions as a baby." Grandma Pat continued, Madison looks like your mother's side of the family, but you look like someone your mother could never be. And I think that planted a seed of resentment that grew over the years. She told me that she'd noticed my mother's different treatment of Madison and me from the time we were small children, but she'd convinced herself it was just normal sibling dynamics. But when your mother called me the day after the pregnancy confrontation and tried to convince me that you were unstable and jealous and that Madison needed protection from your dramatic behavior, I realized this wasn't normal sibling rivalry. This was deliberate sabotage. She called you too? I asked, shocked. Oh yes. She spent an hour on the phone trying to convince me that you were having some kind of breakdown and that I shouldn't move in with you. She said you were trying to manipulate me against her and that Madison was the one who really needed my support. The extent of my mother's campaign against me was staggering. She hadn't just reacted badly to my pregnancy announcement, she'd launched a full-scale effort to isolate me from my support system and destroy my reputation within the family. What did you tell her? I asked. Grandma Pat smiled grimly. I told her that if she spent half as much energy supporting you as she did undermining you, she might actually have 2 daughters who wanted a relationship with her. The final piece of the puzzle came from Madison herself. She came over the following weekend, visibly upset and clutching a box of tissues. Julia, I need to apologize to you for something, she said, settling into our living room chair. Madison, you haven't done anything wrong. Yes, I have. I've been complicit in Mom's favoritism for years because it benefited me, and I never stood up for you the way I should have. She went on to explain that she'd always known our mother treated us differently, but she'd convinced herself it wasn't that bad or that it was somehow justified. Mom always had explanations for why she did things differently for us, Madison said. She'd say you were more independent and didn't need as much help, or that you prefer to handle things on your own. I believed her because it was easier than confronting the truth. But then Madison revealed something that completely floored me. Julia, Mom has been calling me every day since the family meeting, trying to get me to side with her against you. She's been telling me that you're trying to destroy the family and that you're using your pregnancy to steal attention from mine. I stared at my sister in disbelief. Even after being confronted by the entire family, my mother was still trying to manipulate the situation and turn Madison against me. She told me that Grandma Pat moving in with you was part of some scheme to cut her out of her inheritance, Madison continued. She said you were poisoning Grandma Pat against her and that I needed to choose sides. What did you tell her? I asked. Madison's eyes filled with tears. I told her that if she made me choose between supporting my sister's right to have her baby celebrated and supporting her demand that you hide your pregnancy, I would choose you every time. That conversation with Madison was a turning point for both of us. For the first time in our lives, we were able to talk honestly about the family dynamics we'd both grown up with, and Madison was finally ready to acknowledge the role she played in enabling our mother's behavior. I'm ashamed that it took something this extreme for me to see what was really happening, Madison said. But Julia, I want you to know that I'm going to do everything I can to make sure both our babies are celebrated equally, and I'm going to call Mom out at every time she tries to play favorites. Over the next few days, more family members reached out to share their own stories and offer support. It was as if my mother's extreme behavior around my pregnancy had finally given everyone permission to acknowledge what they'd been seeing for years. My Aunt Carol organized what she called a family reset dinner at her house, where extended family members could gather to discuss how to move forward in a healthier way. Notably, my mother was not invited to this gathering. At that dinner, I learned even more about the extent of my mother's manipulation over the years. Family members shared stories of conversations where my mother had subtly undermined me, spread rumors about my character, or positioned herself as the victim of my supposed difficult behavior. It's like she's been playing a decades-long game of telephone, my cousin Jennifer observed, except she was the one controlling the message, and the message was always that Julia was the problem. But the most validating moment came when my Uncle Mike stood up at the end of the dinner and said, I want to formally apologize to Julia for believing Linda's version of events for all these years. Julia, you've always been a kind, responsible, hard-working young woman, and I'm ashamed that I let someone else's manipulation color my perception of you. The whole room agreed, and for the first time in my life, I felt like my extended family really saw me for who I was, not through the distorted lens of my mother's manipulation. Since then, my mother has called me every day, sometimes multiple times. She's apologized, she's cried, she's promised to make things right. But here's the thing about trust, once it's broken this badly, it's almost impossible to repair. Madison and I have actually grown closer through all of this. She was genuinely horrified by what our mother had said to me, and she's made it clear that she wants our pregnancies to be celebrated equally. She's even suggested we have a joint baby shower, which I'm actually considering. My father has been trying to play peacemaker, but he's also made it clear to my mother that her behavior was unacceptable. Apparently, they had some very heated conversations after I left that day. David has been my rock through all of this. He's furious with my mother, but he's also been incredibly supportive of whatever I need to do to heal from this situation. And Grandma Pat? She moved in with us last week, and she's been helping me prepare the nursery. She's also made it very clear to my mother that her welcome in our home depends on her acknowledging the full scope of what she did wrong. The most surprising development has been the reaction from extended family. Word got out about what happened, I'm not sure how, but I suspect Grandma Pat may have made some strategic phone calls. My aunts and uncles have been reaching out to offer support, and several of them have shared their own stories about my mother's favoritism toward Madison over the years. My cousin Jennifer, who lives in California, even called to tell me that she'd always noticed how differently my mother treated Madison and me, and that she was proud of me for standing up for myself and my baby. But the real vindication came yesterday. I was at the grocery store when I ran into Mrs. Peterson, who's been friends with my mother for 20 years. She came up to me with a huge smile and congratulated me on my pregnancy. "Your mother is just glowing when she talks about becoming a grandmother," she said. "That's nice to hear," I replied carefully. She told me all about how excited she is for both you and Madison. She said having 2 grandbabies so close in age is going to be wonderful. I just smiled and nodded, but inside I was thinking about how my mother was now telling her friends the complete opposite of what she'd said to me just a few weeks ago. When I got home and told David about the encounter, he shook his head. "She's rewriting history already." "Let her," I said. "The people who matter know the truth." And that's really what this comes down to. I'm not trying to destroy my relationship with my mother permanently, but I'm also not going to pretend that what she said to me was okay, or that it can be easily forgiven. Some people might think I went too far with my revenge. They might say that families should stick together, that I should have just ignored what she said and moved on. But here's what I learned from this whole experience: sometimes people need to face real consequences for their actions before they understand how much damage they've caused. My mother spent years favoring Madison over me in small ways that I learned to accept. But asking me to terminate my wanted pregnancy so Madison could have an exclusive first grandchild experience? That crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. The truth is, I'm actually grateful this happened now instead of after the baby was born. Can you imagine how my mother would have treated my child compared to Madison's? At least now I know exactly where I stand, and I can protect my family accordingly. My baby is due in 6 months, and Madison's is due about a month after mine. Our kids will grow up knowing they're both wanted and loved, even if they have to learn early that some people play favorites. As for my mother, she's still calling and apologizing, but she hasn't yet acknowledged the full scope of what she did. Until she can honestly say I was wrong to ask you to terminate your pregnancy, and I was wrong to threaten your marriage, we're going to maintain our distance. David thinks she'll come around eventually, especially once the babies are born. Grandma Pat thinks my mother might need professional help to understand why she was willing to sacrifice one daughter for another. I'm not sure what I think anymore. What I do know is that my baby will be born into a family that fought for their right to exist, and that's not the worst legacy to have. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's refusing to accept unacceptable behavior and building a better life despite the people who try to tear you down. My mother wanted to erase my baby from the family narrative so Madison could shine brighter. Instead, she ended up highlighting exactly how toxic her favoritism had become, and now everyone in our family and social circle knows exactly what kind of person she really is. The baby is kicking as I write this, and I can't help but smile. This little person is so wanted, so loved already by David, me, Grandma Pat, Madison, Tyler, my father, and so many others. One person's inability to see their worth doesn't change that. And honestly, that feels like the best revenge of all. Update: I showed this post to David before posting it, and he wanted me to add that he's incredibly proud of how I handled the situation. He also wanted everyone to know that he's going to be the best dad he can be, and that our kid will never doubt how much they were wanted. Madison also read this, with my permission, and asked me to include that she's horrified by our mother's behavior and that she can't wait for our kids to be best friends. She's also been researching joint baby shower ideas, which is pretty sweet. As for my mother, well, she doesn't know about this post, but honestly, I don't care if she finds out. The truth is the truth, and I'm done protecting people from the consequences of their own actions.